This is the 3rd of January
Yep.
of 2021, and I am interviewing Grandpa.
Okay.
I'm going to sneak a peek at the questions.
From what country did your family immigrate from? Do you know when your family came over to the USA?
Why, yes, I do. So on my father's side, my father's parents came from Czechoslovakia. My grandfather, my father's father, came over, I think, somewhere around 1900, 1902, somewhere like that, 1903. He was about 7 years old. So he was Levi's age when he left his country and went to a new country. And his mother's parents were from Russia. My grandma was born in the United States, so her parents came over earlier, so sometime in probably the early 1890s, and they came from Hungary. I don't know if I said that or not. And then on my mother's side, her mother's family, she was born in the United States. She was born in the United States in the early 1890s. Don't tell her I told you that. But she had an older sister who was born in Europe but didn't live, and so somewhere probably around 1890, her parents came to the United States, and my mother's other side were from Czechoslovakia also, and he came over probably also in the 1890s, if I had to guess.
What were your parents' names? What were they like?
My father was Alvin Nelson Haas, and his nickname was Bud.
Who you're named for?
Who you're named for Alvin Asher. Both begin with a good job. And he, what was he like? So he and I worked together. He was very athletic. He was a very good athlete, and he was a good businessman. And he was very sure of himself, very confident. He could be very, very nice to people. He liked good things, like good clothes. He was a big shopper, so he liked to buy things, and he always liked to have the newest and latest technology. So he would do a lot like that. My mother, her name was Barbara. Hermine was her middle name, and Amster was her maiden name. And she was artistic. In fact, she was an art major at Northwestern, so that's what she studied when she went to college. In addition to regular studies, she focused on art. And she also was a good athlete and a good volunteer in the community. And I wouldn't say they were overly warm and loving, but they obviously enjoyed having a big family because I'm one of 4. And they were very happily married to each other. I think that's it. They both loved golf. That was their favorite thing.
Okay. What did your parents do for work?
Okay, so my father went to Bud Industries, and so he started at Bud Industries when he was, I'm sure he worked when he was younger, but he started full-time when he graduated college in 1939. And then he, although a funny story, if I'm remembering this right, he was short chapel credits. You used to have to go to chapel in college. So he ended up having to go back after he supposedly was ready to graduate and spend another semester to get all of his chapel credits in. And so he joined Bud Industries in 1939, but he left when he went to fight in World War II in 1942, and came back, I believe, in 45 or 46. And he worked at Bud Industries. It was Bud Radio then, and he worked there until he died. And my mother worked during World War II in the factories a little bit in between school or after school, because the men were all fighting in the war overseas, so they had to work they needed women to work in the factory, so she did that. And I'm sure she worked a little bit in her mother's shoe store, My grandmother supported her family with a shoe store in Worcester, Ohio. And after that, she was a homemaker and a golfer.
Do you remember your grandparents?
Yes, I remember my grandmothers. They both lived to see Daddy born. So I knew them well. They were at our wedding. And they used to come and visit all the time. Neither one lived in Cleveland early on. When I was real little, my father's mother lived in Cleveland. And then she got remarried after my grandfather died and moved to New York. And then when that husband died, she moved to Florida. And she lived in Miami. And my other grandmother lived in Worcester until I was in middle school. And then she moved to Cleveland.
Okay. Can you tell me about your parents' families?
Sure. So, my father's father founded, his name was Max. Uncle Jordan's middle name is for him. And he founded Bud Industries. Bud was Bud Radio at the time. And they made their first product was a product you put on the back of radio so you didn't need to have an antenna. They were really in the antenna business early on, not the box business. And they made car antennas and other kinds of things. And then he sold off that portion of the business and did more with the enclosures. And my mother's family, and my grandmother started a business with him, and she worked in the business. In fact, I've got copies of financial reports for the business that she wrote out in her own handwriting. So we've got copies of that in the safe at work. And my mother's family, her father had the shoe department at his brother's clothing store. And that's what he did. But he died when my mother was 6 years old. 5 or 6. And then my grandmother took it over and made it a separate store. And I know people who were my age and even younger who knew they used to get their shoes in her shoe store. So she became very well known in the city of Worcester and was very successful in running the shoe store.
Where were you born?
Cleveland, at Mount Sinai Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore. But it's right near where, when you go downtown to your temple, where you went for consecration. Do you remember going down?
By the Natural History Museum.
It was near the art museum. And the Natural History Museum.
Yeah, right near where we skated at
Right.
White Oval.
So that's where that hospital was.
Okay. Where did you live when you were young?
So when I was first born, we had a house in University Heights on Belvoir Road. And then when Uncle Greg was born, it got a little crowded in the house because there were 4 of us. So we moved to Shaker Heights, and we lived across from Horseshoe Lake. And I lived in Shaker Heights my whole life until we moved to this house 2.5 or 3 years ago. 2.5 years ago.
Who are your siblings? Did you get along as kids?
Well, that's a very good question. So my oldest brother is Steve, and he is a little more than 6 years older than I am. He was born in 1947 in December. And then my next brother is Douglas, and he was born in 1950. And then I was born in 1954. And then there's Uncle Greg, who was born in 1957. So when I was growing up, Uncle Greg and I got along very well. We were very good friends and very close. And in high school, then I got along pretty well with Uncle Doug. We were good friends. We were in high school together. But when we were growing up, Uncle Doug and I and Uncle Steve and I did not get along very well at all. We were different stages and did things differently. Because by the time I was just a little older than you, I think I was 11 when Uncle Steve went to college. So we really didn't have a lot of the same memories. I was a little kid to him. When he was going through high school, I was in lower elementary school. So we didn't relate very well. And Uncle Steve interestingly, for someone who became a teacher, really did not relate well to younger children at the time. I think that's why he taught both middle and upper and high school rather than elementary school.
What did you like to do for fun as a kid?
I rode my bike. That's what I seem to remember doing a lot of. I like to.
Who else likes to ride his bike?
I read.
Who else likes to read?
In fact, I got into, the teachers were very worried because what I really liked to do at recess was go sit on a bench and read my book. And they were very concerned that I wasn't getting up and running around with all the other kids. And so my parents had to tell me that I had to stop reading at recess and go play with the other kids. So I like to go sledding and ice skating. I used to like to go ice skating a lot too. We could go skating at the lake across the street from our house sometimes. Although Uncle Steve fell in once, so then we weren't allowed to do it anymore.
Okay.
And I did not push him in.
Yeah, I can really think that's true.
He was older, but he didn't go very deep. He just went in up to his knees, like.
Okay. Where did you go to school? What was it like?
So for elementary school, I started at a school called Malvern, which is in Shaker, and I went there kindergarten and first grade. And in the public school system, where you lived determined which school you went to. And so then they moved the line, and I had to move to Boulevard School, which is also in Shaker. And I went there, and it was a good school, and there were a lot of nice kids there. And we had, like you do, there were like 2 or 3, I think there were 2 second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and so you'd have a lot of the same kids in your class. But what's nice is they all live in your neighborhood. So we could go home, actually, we went home for lunch. So the bus would take us home at lunch, and sometimes you'd go to a friend's house for lunch, and then you would come back and do that. And then in 7th grade, I switched to Hawken. Have I exhausted your questions? Have I exhausted you? Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
What activities did you do in school?
Well, we used to do dancing in school as part of PE. I climbed the rope. I wasn't until middle school that I could really climb the rope, and I used to like climbing the rope, actually. I'd get all the way up and ring the bell. There used to be a bell on the top. It was in the Brown Gym. Now, the Innovation Lab was where I used to climb the rope. They used to have a rope there. And I really liked to do the rings. That was fun. Do you know what the rings are? You have these rings and you swing back and forth, and then you like flip your body and you can do little twirls with them, and it was something people did. When the Olympics come, Summer Olympics, they'll do gymnastics. So that was more gymnastic stuff. I forgot what the question was. What did I do for fun?
What activities did you do in school?
What activities did I do at school?
You ran cross country?
I ran, in high school then I ran cross country. In Hawken, in the lower grades, you had to take a sport each season. In middle school, so I don't remember what I did. I remember in the upper school, I did cross country as my winter sport. In the lower school, that must have been where I learned to run in the snow, because we used to go running in the snow. We'd run through the woods and do all of that. But in the winter, my freshman year, I had to wrestle, and I did not like that at all. It was either wrestling or basketball, and there was no way I was playing basketball. You're a better basketball player now by far than I was when I was in 9th grade. That give you a sense of, I was not a very good athlete.
And I'm not there.
Yeah, I can't remember what I did in the fall. So in the fall I did cross country at the upper school. It must have been track. And I did track in the spring. I did cross country through high school.
Okay.
And I got my letter in cross country, which they gave you if you did 4 years of the sport.
What was different about growing up when you did compare to growing up now?
Well, we certainly didn't have computers or video games.
No Nintendo Switch?
No Nintendo Switch. our TVs, there were 3 stations.
And there was a knob.
Oh yeah, there were knobs. It was a big deal if you got something with a remote control. I don't even know why you'd need it to change channel for 3 stations. But it would turn the TV off and on. But you know how some people call it a clicker? You ever heard people call it? That's because it used to make a click noise every time you push the button. So that's very different. What else is different? There weren't even color TVs. A lot of people didn't have color TVs. You watched them in black and white, they called it. You had a typewriter. So if you wanted to do your papers and you didn't hand write them, you typed them.
I've heard of that. And you couldn't press 2 keys at once, otherwise it would get jammed.
Get jammed. And if you made a mistake, you had to erase it somehow. You couldn't just backspace and keep typing. So that's different. I'm trying to think what else was different then than now. Just almost everything. You know, you did a lot. The stores were different. You'd go to the movies, but you couldn't really watch new movies on TV at all. It could be years until they came on TV. So everything was very, very different. They didn't have, when I was first born, they just were beginning to have jets. So you used to go on what were called propeller planes. They went much more slowly. And you took the train. I took the train to camp. And I used to take the train to go visit Grandma because I didn't have a car. And it was too expensive to fly, so we would take the train to go back and forth when Grandma was in college.
What was your first job? Did you like it?
My very first job was, we had a neighbor down the street who had a pool, and he was a friend of my parents. And I think that was my first real job, was cleaning Eddie Roth's swimming pool. Except it was a very old house and a very old pool, and the pool equipment kept breaking every time I got there. And I used to have to go get Mr. Roth to have him figure out how to fix it, because I didn't understand how to do that. So I did that, and then my next job, which was really my first real job, was for a company that Bud Industry owned at the time called Repco, and it was a distributor. And there were things, and I think you worked with them, resistors. Did you ever work with a resistor?
When we did the Theremin, one of them was a resistor.
So it's like a long, thin piece of like a metal rod, a teeny thin metal rod with, it's called ceramic. So it's sort of like a dish material in the middle with different colors. Okay, and they would carry these by the thousands. Each one would tell you what it would do to resist the electrical impulses. And they decided that instead of the way you normally count them, was you would weigh them and you would say, oh, there's 300 in an ounce or something, right? They decided that wasn't accurate enough. So for a summer, I had to hand count all of these things. 1, 2, 3, so boring. Beyond boring. And I used to have to take the bus to get there. It was downtown. That was not my favorite job.
Okay. Which new technology have you found most helpful in your life?
Computers. Ooh, or phones. I guess because smartphones and computers are pretty close to each other, I would say they're right there on the list together. Those are probably the most helpful parts of what I do, because I use my computer all day long at work, and I use my phone when I'm not on my computer. So I would say those are the 2 best technologies that I use. Although there are things that you don't think about as technologies, like what you have in a car. To me, one of the most useful technologies I have is the indicator that lights up when there's a car next to me when I'm driving on the freeway.
Blind spot?
The blind spot indicator. Because as you know, I have trouble seeing to the left. And so this makes sure that I don't miss cars that are coming up alongside me. Or that I do miss them, I guess, is really the point, instead of smacking into them.
Which new technology do you find to be the most annoying?
Cell phones.
Cell phones or like iPhones?
Cell phones of any type, because everybody is always looking at them instead of talking to each other. Even I'm guilty of doing that, right, Grandma? So that's sort of annoying when everybody's sitting at the table and instead of talking to each other, they're looking at their phone to see what they're missing.
How did you meet Grandma?
I met Grandma at dancing school. There was a party, and it was a hayride. And we went to the hayride, and you were supposed to ask when you got there, and I didn't know many of the girls, because when I went to Hawken, there were only boys there. There were no girls at Hawken. And so I didn't know anybody, and this was when I was in 10th grade. And so I ended up, they had more boys than girls that night. So I didn't get to ask anybody to be with me, but Grandma was asked by a guy she knew who went to Hawken with me. So he was a year younger than I was. So we ended up on the hay wagon together in the dark. So, and somehow Grandma and I hit it off. You know, that means we got along really well. We were chatting the whole time. And Grandma had just gotten contacts that day, I think, if I remember right. And she kept getting worried that she'd lost her contact, and it was dark, so you couldn't tell if you had your contact or not. So we're all looking around in the hay to see if we can find Grandma's contact. And then they pull into the light, and we get off, and I saw Grandma for the first time. So that's how Grandma and I officially met. We chatted for a long time in the dark, but couldn't see each other.
Did it actually fall out ever?
No, I don't think it ever fell out of your eye, did it? No, it was in there, but she was worried, you just didn't know. They were, and Grandma still wears them today. The contacts were different than, you know how thin they are and flimsy? They were more like a piece of hard plastic. If you ever see Grandma's contacts, they're hard plastic. So they can break, they snap, or they pop out of your eye, and you
or they move around so it's like in a different part. It's off your iris.
Your eye. That could have been what was happening. I think Grandma was having, and she wasn't used to them.
Right.
So it was a very different thing. But that's how Grandma and I met.
Okay. What is your earliest memory?
Earliest memory. In our first house, so I must have been 2 or 3, I remember my mother, 2 early memories. They must have been right around the same age. My mother, I was like 3 maybe, 2 or 3, and my mother was putting tile down on the floor. And in those days when you put tile down on the floor, you put this cement stuff or this glue all over the floor, and then you gradually put the tiles in one at a time. And my mother, which you're supposed to do, started furthest away from the door. And I guess I must have gotten up from my nap and got out of bed and was coming to walk into the room. And my mother started screaming at me because she didn't want me to walk through the glue that was on the floor and get my feet stuck. So I remember her screaming at me not to do this because she couldn't get to me because she was on the other side of the glue. And I remember that. I also remember I was probably about the same age. I was in the hospital because I had to have surgery on my eye. And I remember being in the hospital and my parents coming to visit me for a little while. And in those days, you didn't have like a room. It was a big room, and there were probably 8 or 10 other kids in the room with me. And I remember my parents telling me that I had to be brave because someone they knew was in one of the other beds nearby. And he wasn't as brave as I was, so I needed to be brave so he knew what it was like to be brave.
What world event has the most impact on you?
What world event has the most impact on me? That's a good question. Maybe. So I think there are 2. One is the Vietnam War and the protests against it, and all of the activities that happened at that time. It helped form my beliefs that peace is better than war, and that civil rights are important, and all of those things happened. I think the other event that certainly impacted me the most was 9/11, because it came at a very difficult time for our business, so we had to struggle to save our business. We almost lost but Industries. It almost went under. And at the same time, it changed how you travel, and it changed how things are done around the world, everything from how you can open a bank account and how you get money to everything else. So that's probably the other world event that changed my life the most. It's a good question.
What was my dad like growing up?
Your father
I regret you putting this one in.
was the sweetest boy.
No, I don't believe that.
Who had the biggest temper.
Okay, that I believe.
He was, you know what? Dad worked very hard at a lot of things, and he had a lot of challenges to overcome because he used to have fever seizures. You know what that is? He would all of a sudden, we'd be sitting here chatting, and he would suddenly run a real high fever and start shaking. He'd get what are called convulsions. And so it was a very scary time. So we had to take him to the hospital many times when that happened. And then he developed food allergies. And so he couldn't eat things that other kids could eat, like Levi, but there weren't as many options. So he had to eat sawdust bread, I think, or whatever it was. It was terrible. But he had his own shelf of his foods that he could eat. But Daddy tried very hard at a lot of things. Daddy really, really, really wanted to be a good athlete. And I think it came to him later than other kids. So I think so he had that little challenge too. But I think he tried hard to do his best, and really also taught me to enjoy watching sports, because I would never watch them, and that's what Daddy loved to do more than anything in the world, would be to watch or play sports. So, I think, what? He also, the other thing about Daddy was he was very kind. So if there were kids at school that didn't have many friends, Dad would want to bring them into the group to make them his friend too. So he was very kind to other people. But boy, did he and Uncle Jordan fight. They fought all the time. If you think you and Levi fight, it's nothing compared to Daddy and Uncle Jordan. The other thing that Daddy did, nobody could move around his room or get dressed like Daddy did. The whole house shook. When Daddy was probably as big as you, the light fixture under his room would be shaking while Daddy was getting dressed. I don't know what he was doing up there, but that's what he would do. So that's what I think about with Daddy when he was growing up.
What were you doing?
He was like jumping into his clothes. I don't know. He was very high energy. He liked to get up early and go get things done. So I never had to worry about getting Dad up in time for school. Some of your uncles, it was another story, but Dad was not.
Dad Bumstead.
Right.
What is your favorite family vacation?
Favorite family vacation? Well, it could be the trip we all took to Grand Caymans. I think that's my favorite one that we all did together. If I had to pick one like that. I think the other one that was a favorite family vacation was before you were born and before Daddy and Mommy were married. We went to Hawaii, and that was a really good vacation too. That's Grandma's and my favorite spot. So as a family vacation, that's a good thing. One family vacation I didn't enjoy so much was Disney. Disney was not as much fun for grown-ups, I think, at that time. But it was okay.
Alright, that's the last question. Thank you everyone for watching.
You want to do a fresh one? What's your name?
Levi.
Levi who?
Haas.
And who are you interviewing?
I'm interviewing Grandpa. And what was your favorite food as a kid?
Chocolate. It's always chocolate. Chocolate cake, I think, was probably my favorite food. I like steak and hamburgers. Would probably be the things I like to eat the most. But chocolate cake definitely was my number one.
And what was your favorite color as a kid?
Blue. Oh, no. It was red. Red was my favorite color as a kid.
Who else's favorite color?
Like you? I didn't know that was your favorite color. So cool. So that's what it was.
Good job.
Very good. Thank you.